If you don't end up watching or listening to this entire video, let me just summarize what I'm trying to say right off the bat. Do not go to Rock Island. On August of 2021, I took my first and last trip to Rock Island. After taking 2 ferry rides, I arrived at the island at about 2 p.m. I had booked the remote campsite E, which is a backpacking site. It's a little over a mile from the dock. I took my time hiking out just to enjoy the scenery and took a couple breaks just due to the weight of my backpack. It was definitely packed more for camping than hiking. And I got to my site, I set up my tent, I got everything situated, started gathering sticks and driftwood from the beach so I could start a fire. On my third trip back from the beach, before I got to my site, I heard a single high-pitched squeal coming from the forest. It didn't sound close, but it was such an unusual sound that I stopped in my tracks and waited a good 30 seconds, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't, so I continued back to my site. When I got back, I began working on getting a fire started. Now, the remote camping sites on Rock Island are pretty well spaced out. Sites C, D, and E are grouped together, but they're probably 100 yards between each site. There's not a real trail connecting the 3 sites directly, but enough people have kind of walked around the ridge between the 3 that there's enough, you can see that there's an obvious path. As I was setting up some sticks in my fire ring, something caught my eye and I looked up. Fairly far away, it looked like it might have been at Site D, maybe a little further, was a person running in my direction. My first thought was, well, that's odd, because, like I said, it wasn't really a trail they were on. Then my mind just went to, there must be something wrong, this person needs help. They got a little closer, and it looked like maybe it was a woman in loose gray clothes, maybe in a hoodie. It was still far enough away that I couldn't really make out the details. I quickly stood up from the crouching position I was in, and just as I did, I heard that high-pitched squeal noise again. It was behind me. It was much closer this time. And this startled me quite a bit, so I turned around to look behind me. I scanned the trees for a couple seconds, but I didn't see or hear anything. I turned back around because I knew the person running must be getting close, but now they were gone. Again, I stood there, scanned the trees, but didn't see them anywhere. So I was confused. I was kind of frozen for a few seconds. It was all very strange. But I was able to reason it out in my head that there's just a fellow camper from Site C or D that was maybe running to the pit toilet. That's a couple 100 yards west of the sites. I tried to forget about it, but it was really just bothering me. I did not like whatever that squeal noise was. I just felt strange. With some effort, though, I decided just let it go, started my fire. I had a quick meal, had a couple adult beverages, and started to take a little walk. I hadn't seen sites C or D yet, so I thought I would check those out, see if I have any neighbors camping nearby. Site D was empty. I did see the path that led from that site to the main trail and pit toilet, so that made me feel a little less uneasy about the runner. I figured it was maybe someone from Site C that took a strange way to get to the main trail by going through Site D. It didn't make a ton of sense, because I still should have seen them, but it made me feel a little better. I continued on to Site C, and saw there was a tent set up. I really didn't want to bother anyone, but I thought I'd go over with the excuse that I would introduce myself as a camping neighbor from Site E and see if anyone looked like they may have been the person running earlier. I came up on the site and there were a couple sitting at a picnic table. Neither of them looked like what they had been the person I saw running. I introduced myself and they introduced themselves. They were probably in their mid-30s. They were very nice. Both seemed to be pretty drunk, but a quiet drunk. I didn't ask about the runner or the squealy noise because I thought it might be weird. I wished them a good night and walked back to my tent. When I got back, I had a cigar, had a few more drinks. It got dark and started as perfect night. The sky was clear and I was just staring up, looking at just millions of stars. I felt better about everything from earlier and felt stupid about the whole thing and decided to get some sleep. It was a long day, so I fell asleep almost immediately. At around 2:30 a.m., I woke up by a huge boom of thunder. It started down. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped. Now, I love camping in the rain, but I do not like camping in a lightning storm. A pretty big storm came through, and I was starting to worry a little. The wind was whipping at my tent, and the ground was just shaking from the thunder and lightning. I did not feel good about being out there in a tent. It just felt very exposed. The storm lasted for about an hour before it just became just kind of a light, steady drizzle. I was just starting to fall back to sleep when I heard the squeal noise again. I opened my eyes up wide in the dark and just lay there sad. There was another louder squeal noise, and it was pretty close. I knew there were no real dangerous animals on Rock Island. There are deer, maybe porcupine, but nothing like bear or wolves. Knowing that still didn't make me feel better, though. There was just something about that squeal I didn't like. Now I say squeal because that's the best I can describe it. It sounded like a pig squeal. I don't honestly know that much about pig noises, but that's what I thought of when I heard it, like an injured or angry pig squeal. And I continued to lay in my tent, started to hear footsteps outside my tent. It was still raining, so the sounds were pretty buried in the sound of rain, but definitely sounded like somewhat large animal or human walking around. And I sat up on my tent. I took a knife I had out just to make me feel better. In my head, I just kept saying, you know, it's an animal. It's fine. There's nothing in these woods that can hurt you. I listened to the footsteps. I started moving away from my tent. I just sat there being still, holding on to my knife for maybe 10 minutes or so without hearing anything else. I started thinking to myself, it's fine. It's just an animal. I'm being stupid. You need to get some sleep. But just as I was about to lay back down, there was a very loud squeal, and it was right outside my tent this time. And it felt like my heart just stopped, and a shiver went down my spine. My heart was beating so hard, my entire body was pulsing. I felt that in my ears. It took everything in me, but I forced out a "get out of here." Not shouting, but just as stern and mean sounding as I could at that moment. I didn't hear any more squeals or footsteps that night, but I also didn't sleep very well the rest of the night. I just sat there in my tent, maybe for an hour before I laid down. Eventually the rain stopped. I kept laying there until the sun came up. All that time just kind of reassuring myself I was being stupid. It was just an animal. And it was probably 7 a.m. before I decided I had to get out of my tent to relieve myself. But then as soon as I stepped out of my tent, I saw that my picnic table had been turned over and was upside down. When I saw this, I surprisingly calmly thought, okay, this is enough. I'm leaving the island today. I checked my surroundings, nothing else seemed out of place, and I eventually reasoned to myself that the wind had blown over the table during the storm. That still seems strange though, just because the table was pretty heavy and I felt like I would have heard the table flipping over, but that might have made sense. I made some cold instant coffee, had a bite to eat, started to feel a little better about the whole thing, then decided to go for a hike. And I admit, I get easily scared just when I'm out camping by myself in the woods. Maybe that's natural. But after I had some coffee and food and the sun came out, I realized nothing I heard or saw was really anything that couldn't be explained. Other than not getting a good night's sleep, I was having a pretty good time. The reason I came to the island in the first place was to hike the 7-mile Thorderson Loop Trail that has a lot of interesting things to see, and I was excited to start that hike. I packed a few things in my backpack and started off. Fairly close to my site is the water tower, and I have no idea how it originally worked or why it had to be a tower, but it's an impressive building with a fireplace that it looked like someone had recently had a fire in it. A little further down the trail was a cemetery where 2 sisters and a few others are buried. It's believed there are still more buried in unmarked graves there. Those are likely some of the settlers from the old fishing village. And the island actually has 3 cemeteries. There's one by the beach, and that's where Chester Thorderson is buried. There's one on the eastern part of the island where the 2 sisters are buried. And there's one in the northern part of the island where the original lighthouse keeper, David E. Corbin, is buried. There's also at least one Potawatomi burial area on the island, but no one really knows exactly where that is. So I kept walking on the trail until I came to a nice scenic overlook area with a bench where I sat down and had a drink of some water. And I started to hear some talking on the trail ahead of me, but I couldn't see anyone yet. There was a bend in the trail there, and the trees were thick, so I sat on the bench, waiting for these people to come around the bend. The voices were coming closer, and I could tell that they weren't speaking English, but I couldn't place what language it might have been either. Both voices were very, very deep and guttural. Then, back deep in the woods, I hear a loud and quick ooh, ooh. Sorry, that's my imitation of the noise, but immediately, both the voices I was listening to responded with their own ooh. I kind of smiled then. It sounded like the 2 heard whatever it was in the woods, and they were trying to be funny and mock it by responding. But I got off the bench, I put my backpack back on and started walking in that direction, further down the trail where the voices were coming from. But I never did find these people. The rest of the hike went very well. I visited the cemetery where David E. Corbin is buried. I took a self-guided tour of the Potawatomi Lighthouse. I passed the wooden gate that apparently used to be part of a larger structure. Walked by the Great Hall and the dock area from where I arrived on the island. Visited some of the other structures on the island. Came across the cemetery where Chester Thorderson is buried. Then just kind of finished up that loop by returning to my campsite. It was a very nice hike, a lot to see. Wasn't especially difficult, but I was tired. I did walk down to campsite C to ask the couple I spoke with the night before how they did with the storm during the night, but they had packed up and left. I was disappointed because I also really wanted to ask them about the squealing noises during the night, and the rest of the evening was pretty uneventful. I built a fire, made some meals, had a cigar, had some drinks. As soon as it got dark, I was ready for bed since I had so little sleep the night before. I got into my tent, quickly fell asleep. I might have been asleep for maybe 3 hours when I woke up suddenly and was just immediately fully alert. Nothing I was aware of caused me to wake up. I felt something was wrong. I sat up in my tent, and this part's a little hard to explain. A feeling of complete dread washed over me. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It felt like there was something in the tent with me. And I could feel that it was angry. Just seething with anger. Rageful, even. And I could feel its hatred for me. It felt like something very bad was about to happen, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I just started to shiver uncontrollably. And then the smell of garbage or rotten meat, and it just started to get stronger and stronger to the point where I wanted to throw up, but I couldn't. I was just frozen. I had never felt so exposed and helpless, and I just stared forward at nothing, just frozen. And the weird thing is that I accepted whatever was about to happen to me. It was like my brain telling me that whatever is about to happen, even if it's death, will at least be relief. And then I passed out. At least I have to assume I passed out. That's all I remember until I woke up at about 8 a.m. that morning. When I woke up, I was laying outside of my sleeping bag, on top of it, and my legs were in a unnatural and uncomfortable position. I was on my back, my left leg straight out, and my right leg was bent so that my foot was up against my left knee, and my heart started pounding. But I kept thinking to myself, it was a dream. I'm leaving right now. It was a dream. I'm going to leave right now. And I packed up everything as quickly as I could and started back toward the dock to catch the first boat off the island. Since the first boat from Washington Island doesn't arrive until about 10:30 a.m., I had to kill a little time around the Great Hall and dock area. I wanted to get off that island so bad, but I did feel a little better just being out of those woods and I could see other people around. I sat down on a bench just a little to the east of the dock, lit a cigar just to give me something to do while trying not to think about the night before. I was sitting a few minutes and just scanning out over the water when I was startled by someone behind me saying, "Hi." I jumped up and was embarrassed when the person came around saying, sorry, didn't mean to scare you, saw you were smoking and just came over to ask if you had a lighter." I felt like an idiot and told him, that's fine. I just didn't sleep very well the night before, just kind of zoned out. And I handed him my lighter. He thanked me, lit a cigarette, and handed the lighter back to me. And we started to talk about the usual things you might talk about. He said he was from around the Madison area. We talked about the storms we've been having. He seemed to be a real outdoorsy kind of guy and talked about his plans to move to Washington Island. It was a nice, normal conversation and kind of took my mind off the night I just had for a little bit. Seemed like a pretty nice guy. Then naturally, he asked me what site I'd been staying at. I told him I was staying at Site E the last 2 nights. He said he usually books that site, but I must have reserved it before him. He said he had booked Site D the last 2 nights, and I was surprised by this because no tent or anything was at Site D the 2 times I walked past the site, and I told him this. And he said he comes to the island a few times a year to you have to book a site to go there, but he actually camps at different areas on the island. And I asked him where he camps, and he told me most of the time he camps in the East Cemetery. But he also likes to camp in the woods south of the lighthouse. He told me he hikes about halfway down the Fernwood Trail and just kind of heads north into the woods, where he finds a place to camp. He said that one time he found the ruins of a small log house in those woods, and he's going to try and find it again and camp inside of it. And at this point, I started just to change my opinion about this guy. I wanted to change the subject, but then he asked me if I heard the screeching noises in the woods. I took a second to reply and knew he was talking about the squealing I had heard. And I told him I had, and asked him if he knew what it was. This time, he took a second to reply, and I saw his face change. He looked like he was thinking if he should tell me something, like a secret. And my jaw just kind of tightens up thinking about this conversation with this guy, but no expression at all on his face. He says, matter-of-factly, a demon lives on this island. And under any other circumstance, I would have laughed this off, but not after what I experienced that night before. And he looked at me, and he must have seen the anxiety and fear I was feeling, and he surprised me by letting out a quick laugh. He asked me if I saw anything that night. I told him I hadn't seen anything, and he stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. I felt like he could tell I had experienced something. At this point, I was ready for the conversation to be over. Then he told me he had seen something in the cemetery that night. Now his face and mood kind of changed again, like he was trying to confide in me. I really did not want to ask the question, but I knew he wanted me to ask it. So I asked him what he saw in the cemetery. But now my voice was shaky. And I could tell he had changed his mind about telling me. He actually looked at me with empathy, it looked like, and he told me that what he saw was hard to explain, but if I was afraid of the screeching noises, he didn't think I should go near the cemetery. And I didn't say anything right away, but he said 4 words without providing any context. He said, "Keepers of the flame." I looked at my cigar, and the ash was long. I put it out. I told him I was going to wait by the dock for the boat. He nodded, and I started to walk away. After a few steps, he said, "Hey." And I turned around, and I looked at him. He just said, "Don't come back here." And I turned around, started walking away. I don't know if that was a warning or a friendly suggestion, but I took that to heart. My humble suggestion is this: do not go to Rock Island.